Hello everyone, my name is Goopy Legend, and I'm here to talk about the game Furi, which came out in 2016, made by Game Bakers. And I'm here kind of looking at it in 2023 to kind of see how it holds up, what it does and doesn't do right. So let's just take a quick look at it. I've replayed Furi a couple times, playing both of its normal difficulty and hard difficulty, which its hard difficulty is called Furier difficulty. It's like a few extra move sets to each boss, as well as some desperation moves, which I'll get into. I've clocked in about close to 24 hours of the game, so hopefully my knowledge of what I'm about to say can be backed by the fact that I put a lot of time into it. But then again, I'm not too great at Furi, so I guess we'll see how this goes. You start the game by playing as Ryder, also known as the Stranger, and his gameplay is both simple and a little hard to master. And that's due to his movement being precise and fast, given that it is a little bit of a bullet hell game in some aspects. But then once you get into the meat of the combat itself, it's obviously more of an action game than anything else. Ryder has both his melee attack and his ranged attack, where his melee attack results in a sword attack, whereas his ranged attack is a fully automatic energy pistol, which does, in my opinion, really good damage, even though it looks like it's tick damage. The more you use it in fights, the more that health bar just melts. Not only do you have your basic variations of inputs in terms of attacks, you also have charged versions of your melee and range attack, where your charged melee attack does stagger damage to the enemy, as well as leading you to it's kind of like a cutscene, but you're also doing damage in it. It's supposed to make Furi look cool and to just demolish the enemy. Besides your basic inputs of your melee and range attacks, you also have charged variants of them, where your charged sword attack lets you stagger and lead into a cutscene that has Ryder damaging the enemy in a very flashy way, which is great. However, it doesn't do a lot of damage, unfortunately, and there is only one unique cutscene per boss fight that puts Ryder in. And when there's times where you're probably constantly doing that move and you're constantly seeing that same cutscene over and over again, it doesn't feel organic. And that's maybe the one issue I have about it, besides maybe seeing it for the first time and being like, wow, that's awesome. But when you're constantly seeing it, maybe when you're abusing your charged melee attack and you're constantly seeing that cutscene, it can be like, oh, okay. There's nothing really too unique about, what Ryder does when he's put into that kind of state. Besides his charged melee attack, his range attack is a charged single shot, which does massive damage. Once it connects, it leaves the enemy on the ground and they become invulnerable, which makes it so that you can't constantly attack them more than just doing that charged single shot, which makes sense because the charged range attack does a lot of damage. Besides his damage abilities, he has a dash and a parry ability. And we'll go into the dash first before we go into the godlike move that is the parry move. And his dash, when you're just pressing it, lets you do some fast dashes, and that's the biggest of why there's a lot of bullet hell aspects in the game. When you're dashing, you gotta place yourself in a lot of ways where you're trying to avoid attacks constantly. Whereas if you charge the dash, you can go even farther than what your basic dash leads. However, when you're charging the dash, you can't pinpoint as to how much space you're going from than what you're normally used to when you're kind of just pressing it. When you're charging it, it's really hard to tell how far you're really going in the dash, which can lead you into being taken damage. What's fascinating about Ryder, however, before we go into the parry mechanic, is that even while you're dashing, you can still charge either your melee or your range attack, which leaves Ryder's mobility and being able to deal damage flow much better than what you're perceived to look at it in the first place. Where stuff like this, you can do stuff like that where you're charging a hit and you can still dash around while you're still charging it. It feels so good, and especially once it connects on the boss. Oh, it's so good. And now let's go into the parry move, where it is such an amazing move. And I don't know if they meant for the parry move to be this good, but you can parry almost everything in the game. Almost everything. There's some obvious things that you can't parry, but you can test it. Maybe I'm wrong. But you can parry both projectile and melee moves. And depending on what kind of projectile move it is, you can parry it and it reflects back at the enemy. Whereas if you parry a melee attack, you not only get health back, but there's times where you can parry, have the hit get parried, and then get like a one melee hit in. I don't recommend doing that. What you can do with the parry move that makes it even phenomenally better is while you're parrying a boss's melee attack, you can hold down the ranged attack without not charging it. Just holding down the automatic version of it, and while you're parrying, you're getting free hits in without the enemy staggering, and you can just see that health bar just melt. And that's one of the reasons why parrying in the game is so great, is when you get those parries connected, you're either getting health back, or the attack deflects back at them, or you can parry while also still using your gun to deal damage for free hits. And it's not like using the parry move is hard to use. There's both a visual and auditory cue that you can see that it's really hard to miss. And once you kind of figure out the timing of the parry, you can absolutely abuse the hell out of parrying to the point where it just doesn't seem fair to the bosses. What is nice for probably a few people out there is that you as a player won't have to memorize a very extensive combo system like in some games like DMC or Bayonetta or other games similar to that, which can be a little reassuring for people. And due to Ryder having not that extensive of a moveset, you're just given a sword and a gun and just to go at them. But the bosses themselves, however, feel like they have over 100 different movesets, which we'll get into right now. Every boss fight has a unique playstyle to them while sticking to the fundamentals of the game itself. There are some instances of a boss fight where you will have to change your playstyle a little bit, but it's nothing too drastic except for maybe 1 or 2 cases throughout the entire game. There are 10 bosses in the main game, and then outside of that there's DLC bosses, which is just 2, and they're found in the One More Fight section of the game. And on the DLC bosses side, there's both the Flame and then Bernard. And my only issue with that is, with just Bernard specifically, is just the name. I know that's kind of silly, but I want to recommend a new name. I'm gonna be a little bold and recommend a new name, Bertha. It's a cooler name, it's a little bit more threatening, and I want it. Give it to me now. Both the Flame and Bernard are great additions to the game. Those are one of the instances where, when I was wanting more of it, that's where I would go to, is going to those 2 boss fights. It felt so refreshing, actually, to get more out of the game that was, I think, originally planned. I'm not sure if they had planned to add more bosses to the game, but the fact that they did, I'm very grateful for it. Furi has such a great art direction that you can tell that the game makers put a lot of passion into it. The game itself captures you with a constant mystery of what's going on in the world, as well as the characters and what each boss, especially Ryder, as to what their motivations are. The fact that you don't even know why Ryder was locked up in the first place, besides the fact that you are just an overall threatening figure. Some of the characters, if not most of them, have expressed that you are unstoppable, if anything, impossible to kill. So you're so hard to kill that their only option is to clock you on the head and drag you back into your cell where you started. Knowing that, first time playing at least, I was not astounded, I was bewildered by the fact of like who Ryder is and why there's so much why there's so much care into locking him up, because we don't know what he's done in the past or what he's capable of, besides of what we as a player are already able to do. The only thing I would personally wish they added to Furi in terms of its story is just more detail. The game already has detail already. However, by near the end of the game, it feels a little rushed, which I don't know if that was an executive decision or if that's just how they intended for the game to be already. But either way, it's still a great story. I just want more out of it. I'm left with more questions than answers. Because even by the end of it, I just want to know more about Ryder and what even happens after you beat the game. Because I think it's left to more of what you think as the player is going to happen afterwards. Because they leave a big message in the game where I'll just say you're given 2 options by the end of the game, and I won't say what. But you're given 2 options, and one is obviously worse than the other. In fact, that's all I'll say about it, is that one's obviously a worse option than the other in terms of moral standards. I will give them credit though, because of the fact that there's still detail in the game. They left a lot of concept art that you can find if you have every boss fight at an S rank results, which can sometimes be a little hard to do, but I think it's a little worth it, because once you are given that S rank, you can go look at the concept art. They put a lot of detail into each character, and there's even stuff that can be really fascinating to look at. There's one where I always forget the name of this guy, I'm not going to look at it right now, but he's the poison fish guy, and they show in his concept art where it shows with the helmet off what he might look like, his face. And they have 2 variants of him. When you're actually doing the boss fight, you never get to see his face. So having the concept art and show kind of what the face might look like is really fascinating to me. Another cool thing I'll add about in terms of the lore or even just character lore is that there's one boss I remember, which is the Burst, which I know everyone loves. And there was a point where you get soft locked in that boss fight, which I think they patched now. I mean, I'd be surprised if they didn't, but I digress. When you are walking towards the Burst's arena, she has a drone that scans Ryder and gives out information as to what kind of information that she's trying to get out of Ryder in order to gain an advantage. However, what's fascinating is that the drone states that Ryder has a very low, if not at all, heart rate while still going 45 to 50 miles per hour in terms of just his running speed alone. But it's details like that where you get more background for a character alone is so nice to get when you're constantly wanting to know more and more about the story, the characters, as well as what environment as to why it looks that way. And I love it all. It's all so good. And I haven't gotten to the music yet. The entirety of the album of Furi was so well made by various artists that I would highly recommend you go and just listen to it all. Even if you've already played the game, I would still recommend maybe just going to the album and listening to it from start to finish, because they did a wonderful job. And from what I've learned recently is that they were given a lot of creative freedom for the music in the game. There's a lot of great things going on with Furi, but we haven't really gone into the issues with the game itself. And it can be pretty prevalent first time playing especially, that a lot of people will experience. There'll probably be a lot of instances where you're fighting a boss and you get stuck on any part of the fight, and at that point it becomes a trial and error scenario, which can be very frustrating and practically discouraging to keep playing, because you'll be stuck whether it's at the beginning of the fight or even just at the end of a boss's phase, where you will die and be sent at the very beginning of that boss fight. For a lot of people, I think their stopping point was when they were fighting the Burst, and I totally understand that, because the Burst herself has a lot of moves that can one-shot you if you're not careful, especially when it's a long-range sniper move that just kills you instantly. And it's as simple as that, where you'll just die from a boss because you just didn't know the move set of what that boss has, which again is a whole trial and error scenario where you just have to die and figure it out later. But even when you figure it out, most of a boss's moveset, I've noticed that every boss has some sort of cheap shot that they'll land on you in order to, maybe it's to reposition themselves, or maybe if you're just out of place in any sort of way, or you miss an attack somehow. They all have some sort of cheap shot that they'll land on you. And that alone is infuriating, because a lot of times it can just be something where you're attacking, they miss, but then they get a hit off of you. There's one mechanic in the game that I find the most infuriating that every boss has, is an auto dodge. I'm not even talking about them blocking moves, which some bosses do have, but that's just based on their kit. Like one has a shield, or one simply just has like a wall surrounding them. However, they all have some sort of dodge implemented in their kit, which normally would be okay. However, when I say auto dodge, whenever you think you can land any sort of hit on them, they will automatically dodge every move that you land on them until it's their turn to attack you. And that can be very infuriating, of course, and it looks like all of it just becomes scripted at that point, where the entire fight is scripted and you have to wait for a counterattack. And the fact that you are left with having to counterattack constantly is why parrying is so good. I think the biggest reason as to why they might have added the auto dodge is probably just because of the pacing of the fight may go a little bit by too fast, of course. However, it can also be a sort of making everything look flashy constantly. It can on the surface look super flashy of what both you and the enemy are doing. However, when you as a player are going through the game, as I've mentioned, it just feels scripted. So everything that you're doing doesn't feel like it's your actions. It feels more like you're inputting the same thing in order to get a different result, which can be a little maddening. Times where you can do something differently, it's very refreshing, of course. However, because of this auto dodge mechanic, it's very frustrating to have to wait until it's their turn to feel like attacking or taunt you, I guess, because the only time you really get to attack them or really to when you punish them taunting, because that's one thing that every boss does, almost every boss anyway, is that they taunt you, and when they taunt you, that's when you can attack them. Any other instance like that where it looks like they're not doing anything, that's just them, ready to dodge at every instance they can on you. I think that's the biggest issue with Furi right now, or just with the game itself. That's what one of the biggest issues with Furi is that even with a boss having a large amount of movesets, which looks like it's a good thing because you want the enemy to have a lot of different things in order to find a new way to beat them. But when Ryder himself isn't given a lot of options to deal with an enemy, it becomes a little tedious in order to get the result of just beating the boss by just doing the same thing over and over again, but something slightly different in every fight. I think that's one of the biggest issues with Furi is that even though a boss might have an extensive moveset, writer himself does not, and that leaves you leaving no room to be inventive in the game. You can try and be a little inventive, of course, maybe doing something different each time or finding new ways to beat the boss. However, because of his lack of movesets himself, you can only do so much in the game in order to do something differently in each fight. Even with those issues, Game Baker still made an amazing game, and even looking back on it in 2023, I still seem to be constantly going back to it, and it's with good reason. It's still a wonderful game, especially with how great of a speedrun community they have. They're very supportive, and a lot of the content creators that speedrun the game have very extensive videos as to how to get started and what to expect, essentially. And I think that's one of the greatest things coming into Furi is how much love and care the community has for this game. It may be a short game, but it's a wonderful first time experience. And not only is normal difficulty great, but Furier difficulty is even better, where it really tests your skills at that point. Not only that, they also have a very user-friendly speedrun mode where they'll just throw you right into it. They'll skip all of the in-betweens of each boss fight, and they'll record your time, upload it into their ranking system. And that's another reason why the speedrun community is so great, because everyone just wants to help each other get started. And I think going into the speedrun community, not for myself, but for anyone who wants to get into it, you'll notice your own skill get better and better each time. Where for me, I went from finding a boss for like 30 minutes or so to now being able to do it in like 5 to 6 minutes. It's pretty easy to see how much progress you make in the game, and Game Bakers did a wonderful job as to showing you how far you've gone in the game. I would highly recommend going and looking at the current world record of Furi in any sort of percentage, whether it's any percent, normal difficulty, Furier difficulty, whatever it is. I would highly recommend watching just any of them and just seeing how much skill they put in each boss fight, and their knowledge of it alone is so phenomenally impressive. With such a legendary soundtrack and satisfying gameplay, not only is the DLC of Onimusha a great addition to the game, but also it's refreshing to know that you're given a slightly different option than what you're normally given in the game. Every time I keep going back to Furi, I'm always satisfied with my experience every time, because the more I play it, the better I get at it, even if I'm a little rusty every time I play it, because I think in terms of replayability, I seem to go back to it maybe every like 6 months. But what do you all think of the game? Give me your opinions down below, and I would love to read them all. Even looking at all the reviews of the game, I generally want to know other people's opinions that kind of, for first time playing it, I want to know what you think. So leave it down in the comments below, and I'd love to read them all. This is the end of the video, so if you enjoyed watching my ramblings of a game that was back in 2016, looking at it in 2023, then give me a like and a subscribe, and maybe share it with your friends or your grandma or your grandpa if he's interested. And I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.